The galactic assembly hall shimmered with layers of light that no single species could fully see. Some saw colors, others felt vibrations, and a few sensed the hum of energy through the floor. The hall was older than most civilizations present. It had been rebuilt many times, but its purpose never changed. This was where the galaxy decided who mattered. Hundreds of species filled the vast chamber. Floating delegates drifted in slow circles. Tall figures with crystal skin stood beside short, heavy beings who rested on metal frames. Voices overlapped in dozens of tones, from sharp clicks to soft waves of sound. Translation fields worked constantly, turning all of it into shared meaning. At one of the outer tables sat the human delegation. Evan sat upright, his hands folded neatly on the smooth surface. His dark jacket was simple, with no medals or bright symbols. He looked around the hall with steady eyes, not impressed, not afraid. He had seen this place before, and he knew how little appearances meant here. Mark leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked relaxed, almost bored, but his eyes never stopped moving. He watched the delegates, the guards, the elevated council seats. He noticed patterns most others missed. He always did. Sarah sat beside him, her posture calm but alert. Her fingers rested lightly on a thin data slate. She was reading, but she was also listening. She paid attention to the tone beneath the words, the pauses, the silences. In her experience, silence often spoke the loudest. Lena sat at the end of the table. She looked younger than the others, but her expression was serious. She studied the chamber with quiet focus, taking in details. The distance between exits, the placement of security units, the way some delegates glanced toward the human table and then quickly looked away. They spoke very little. Around them, no one paid much attention. To most of the assembly, humans were an afterthought. A recent addition. A species that had risen quickly but not carefully. Too emotional. Too direct. Too unpredictable. Many believed humans had been invited only because of their growing population and useful labor forces. Some delegates thought of humans as tools. Others thought of them as children. Few thought of them as equals. A tall delegate from an ancient world glanced briefly toward the human table. Its eyes lingered for half a second before it turned away. Humans had no special seating, no elevated status. They were placed where new species always sat, close enough to observe, far enough to be ignored. Evan noticed the glance. He said nothing. The assembly session began with a deep resonant tone that rolled across the hall. Conversations faded. Lights adjusted. The central platform rose slowly, revealing the council seats above. The oldest civilizations occupied those seats, their presence heavy and confident. A voice filled the chamber, calm and smooth. Let the assembly come to order. Delegates settled. Translation fields sharpened. One by one, reports were presented. Border conflicts, resource disputes, trade agreements. Humans listened quietly as worlds far from their own argued over lines drawn in empty space. Mark leaned slightly toward Evan. Same pattern as last time, he murmured. Evan gave a small nod. Yes. Sarah scrolled her slate. They are building up to something. Lena glanced at her. You feel it too? Yes, Sarah replied. They always soften the room first. As the session continued, humans were mentioned only in passing. A trade corridor near human space. A security zone close to human colonies. Each time the words were neutral, but the meaning was not. Evan watched the council members closely. Their expressions, if they had faces, remained controlled. They spoke of balance, order, and stability. Words that sounded good. Words that often hid hard choices. Many delegates nodded along. Humans did not. A break was called. Delegates rose, moved, exchanged quiet discussions. Some gathered in clusters. Others withdrew into private communication fields. No one approached the human table. That was normal. Lena shifted in her seat. They won't even pretend to consult us. Mark gave a quiet smile. They never do. Sarah looked up from her slate. They assume we will accept whatever is decided. Evan's gaze stayed fixed on the council seats. They assume many things. The break ended. Delegates returned to their places. The hall dimmed slightly, drawing focus back to the center. A new proposal was announced. It was introduced as a security measure. A way to reduce risk on the outer systems. A reallocation of protection resources. The words were careful and smooth. Evan listened closely. So did Sarah. As the details unfolded, the meaning became clear. Several regions would lose assembly protection. Those regions happened to be near human colonies. The reasoning was simple: humans could handle it. They were adaptable, resilient. If losses occurred, they would recover. The proposal did not mention human lives directly. It did not need to. Mark's jaw tightened slightly. Lena's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Sarah's expression remained calm, but her eyes darkened. Around the chamber there was little reaction. Some delegates looked relieved. Others looked indifferent. A few looked pleased. No one objected. Evan exhaled slowly. He had expected this. Humans had seen the signs for years. They were useful when needed, expendable when not. The assembly valued order above fairness. Stability above consent. Evan glanced at his team. Each of them met his eyes in turn. No words were spoken. None were needed. They understood. The proposal moved toward a vote. Lights shifted. Signals flashed. Delegates cast their decisions. Yes, yes, yes. The tally climbed quickly. As the final count appeared, the proposal passed. A soft tone confirmed it. Some delegates relaxed. Others began preparing their next arguments. At the human table no one moved. For a moment the humans simply sat there, quiet and still. Then Evan stood. The movement was small, but it caught attention. A few delegates turned. A ripple of curiosity spread. Evan did not raise his voice. He did not display anger. His posture was calm, controlled. "We have listened," he said. The translation field carried his words across the chamber. Some delegates looked surprised. Humans rarely spoke unless invited. "We joined this assembly in good faith," Evan continued. "We believed cooperation meant shared responsibility." The hall grew quieter. "We see now that responsibility is not shared equally." A murmur spread. Evan did not accuse. He did not threaten. He stated facts. "We will consider your decision," he said. "And we will respond in our own way." He inclined his head slightly. A gesture of respect, not submission. Then he sat down. The session moved on, but something had shifted. The human delegation gathered their things slowly. No rush. No drama. Mark stood. Sarah followed. Lena rose last. Together they walked toward the exit. More eyes watched now. Some delegates felt a flicker of unease they could not explain. Others dismissed it. Humans always made gestures. They would adapt. They always did. The doors closed behind the human delegation with a soft, final sound. Inside the hall, the assembly continued. Outside, the galaxy had just changed. They were wrong about one thing. Humans were not young, impulsive, or replaceable. And soon, everyone would understand that. The council chamber grew quieter as the new law was announced. The lights above the central platform shifted to a calm blue, a color many species associated with reason and balance. It was meant to feel safe. It was meant to feel right. The voice of the council speaker carried across the hall, smooth and steady. "This law is designed to maintain galactic stability. It will reduce unnecessary conflict and ensure long-term order." Many delegates nodded. Stability was a word they trusted. It meant their worlds would remain unchanged. It meant risk would be pushed away from their borders. At the human table, Evan listened without moving. His face showed nothing. He had learned long ago that reactions were noticed here and noticed reactions were used. The speaker continued. "Several border regions will be reclassified. Assembly protection will be withdrawn, and local governance will be adjusted to reflect the new status." The words were calm. Clean. Almost gentle. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly as the data streamed across her slate. She scrolled slowly, reading each line with care. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the device. Not enough for others to see, but enough that Evan noticed. The border regions were listed one by one. Names, coordinates, population estimates. Human worlds. Human trade hubs. Human colonies built in empty space when no one else wanted them. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He kept his voice low. "They're calling it reclassification," he said quietly. "Yes," Sarah replied. "But it's removal." Lena swallowed. "They're stripping protection." "And autonomy," Mark added. "Did you see that clause?" Evan nodded slightly. He had seen it. The law allowed assembly forces to intervene without consent, but only in these regions. It allowed resources to be redirected away without warning. It allowed losses to be written off as acceptable risk. Evan's expression did not change. Around the chamber, reactions were minimal. Some delegates looked relieved. Others looked bored. A few glanced at the human table, then looked away quickly. No one spoke in opposition. The council speaker paused, letting the words settle. "This decision is not made lightly," the voice said. "However, the data is clear. These regions have demonstrated high resilience. They will adapt. Sarah's jaw tightened. Resilience. That word again. It was always humans who were described as resilient. It meant they could suffer more. It meant they could be pushed further. It meant the galaxy expected them to endure quietly. Evan folded his hands together, slow and controlled. His mind moved faster than his body. He thought of the reports he had read. The warnings sent and ignored. The requests for shared defense that had been delayed or denied. This was not sudden. This was planned. The council speaker gestured and the voting phase began. Lights appeared before each delegate's seat. Symbols flashed. Decisions were made quickly. Yes, yes, yes. The tally rose with little resistance. Mark watched the numbers climb. No debate, he murmured. They already decided, Lena said softly. Sarah closed her slate. Before we even arrived. Evan remained still. His eyes followed the shifting lights. Each one represented a world choosing safety for itself. Choosing distance from risk. Choosing to let others stand in the way. The final count appeared. The law passed. A clear tone echoed through the hall, signaling completion. Some delegates relaxed in their seats. A few began quiet conversations. To them this was just another policy. Another adjustment. Another problem moved out of sight. At the human table, silence settled. Evan exhaled slowly. He did not look angry. He did not look defeated. He looked thoughtful. Sarah broke the silence. They didn't even ask us. Mark gave a short, humorless laugh. Why would they? Lena stared at the council seats. They think we'll accept it. Evan finally spoke. They think we have no choice. The session continued as if nothing important had happened. New topics were introduced. Minor disputes were discussed. The law affecting millions of human lives was already treated as resolved. Evan listened, but his focus had shifted. He was no longer listening for information. He was listening for intent. The intent was clear. The assembly valued order above people. Distance above responsibility. Control above consent. Humans had known this for a long time. What hurt was not the decision. It was the ease with which it had been made. Sarah stood slowly, adjusting her jacket. Her hands were steady now. The tension had turned into something colder. Evan looked at her. She met his gaze and gave a small nod. Mark rose next. Lena followed. Their movement drew attention. A few delegates turned to watch. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Humans did not usually stand during active sessions. Evan took one last look at the council seats. He did not feel hatred. He felt clarity. He spoke, his voice calm and clear. We have heard your decision. The chamber quieted again. Not because of authority but because of curiosity. We understand your desire for stability, Evan continued. We also understand what you are willing to sacrifice to achieve it. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. This law affects our worlds, he said. Our people. Our future. He paused, letting the translation fields do their work. We will not interfere with your vote, Evan said. But we will not pretend it does not matter. No threats. No raised voice. Just truth. We will respond in the way we believe is right. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect without submission. Then he turned away. The human delegation walked toward the exit, their footsteps quiet but steady. The doors opened and closed behind them. Inside the chamber, the assembly resumed its discussions. But something lingered in the air. Some delegates felt it and dismissed it as unease. Others ignored it completely. None of them realized that the law meant to maintain stability had just started to break it. Far from the chamber, human worlds continued their daily lives, unaware of the decision made without them. For now. The vote had passed without hesitation. The consequences would not. The chamber slowly settled after the vote. Lights dimmed to their normal state, and the low hum of conversation returned. Delegates adjusted their seats, checked data streams, and prepared for the next topic. To them, the matter was finished. At the human table, no one moved. Evan sat still, his hands resting on the table, his eyes fixed forward. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down, not as fear but as certainty. This was the point where silence would become agreement. He knew that if humans stayed seated, the decision would be sealed forever. Sarah looked at him from the corner of her eye. Her face was calm, but her breathing was slow and deliberate. Mark stared at the floor, his jaw set. Lena's gaze moved between the council seats and the exit doors, as if measuring the distance. The chamber quieted naturally as the council prepared to move on. That was when Evan stood. The sound of his chair sliding back was soft, but it carried farther than expected. A few nearby delegates turned. then more. The movement spread like a ripple across still water. Evan stood straight, not tall with pride, not tense with anger. He simply stood. The council speaker paused mid-motion. The chamber grew silent. Evan did not rush his words. He waited until the translation fields adjusted, until every delegate could hear him clearly. Our species joined this assembly for cooperation, he said evenly. His voice was calm. It did not echo. It did not demand attention. It earned it. Not sacrifice. The words were simple, clear. There was no accusation in them, only truth. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others stared openly now. Humans did not usually speak like this. They either argued loudly or accepted quietly. This was neither. We believed cooperation meant shared risk, Evan continued. Shared responsibility. Shared respect. He looked toward the council seats. His gaze was steady. This decision shows us that belief was misplaced. A low murmur moved through the hall. It was not anger. It was discomfort. Evan did not raise his voice. You have chosen stability that costs others first. You have chosen distance over duty. The council speaker attempted to interject, but Evan lifted one hand slightly. Not as a command but as a request. Please, Evan said. Allow me to finish. The speaker hesitated, then nodded. Evan took a slow breath. We will not beg for protection. We will not argue for our right to exist. Sarah stood beside him. Then Mark. Then Lena. Their movement was quiet, united, and deliberate. We will not remain part of a system that asks us to bleed in silence, Evan said. We came here to build something together. Not to be used as a barrier between danger and comfort. The words settled heavily. No one interrupted. We respect the assembly, Evan continued. But respect does not require obedience when principles are abandoned. He paused. Humanity will choose its own path. That was all. No threats. No promises. No warnings. Evan inclined his head slightly toward the council. It was the same respectful gesture he had used before. This time it carried finality. He turned. Sarah gathered her slate. Mark adjusted his jacket. Lena straightened her shoulders. Together they walked away from the table. For a moment no one reacted. Then the reality of what was happening began to sink in. They were leaving. Not storming out. Not shouting. Not demanding concessions. Leaving. The doors at the edge of the chamber sensed their approach and began to open. The sound was soft, almost polite. A delegate near the aisle leaned forward, eyes wide. Another whispered urgently into a private channel. A few council members exchanged glances, their composed expressions cracking for the first time. Humans had protested before. Humans had argued. Humans had complained. Humans had never walked out. The delegation passed between rows of seats. Eyes followed them. Some curious. Some uneasy. Some afraid. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken, but she did not slow her pace. She kept her eyes forward. Mark noticed several security units shift position, unsure whether to act. They did nothing. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The decision was no longer theoretical. It was real. It was happening. Evan walked at the front, his steps steady. With every step, the distance between humanity and the assembly grew wider. Behind them, the chamber remained frozen. The council speaker finally found their voice. This is highly irregular, they said. Evan did not turn back. Another council member rose. If you leave now, you abandon your voice. Evan stopped at the threshold. He turned his head just enough to be heard. A voice that is only allowed to agree, he said calmly, is not a voice at all. Then he stepped forward. The doors closed behind them. The sound was quiet, but it echoed. Inside the chamber, silence stretched longer than anyone expected. No one spoke. No one moved. The assembly, an institution that had stood unchallenged for centuries, had just been refused. Not attacked. Not threatened. Refused. Some delegates felt a cold realization creep into their thoughts. If humans could walk away, others might follow. If humans could stand alone, then the assembly's power was not as absolute as it appeared. Others dismissed the thought. Humans would return. They always did. They needed trade, protection, recognition. They would come back. They had to. Outside the chamber, the human delegation walked through the long corridor toward the docking platforms. The lights here were simpler. The walls unadorned. Lena finally spoke. There's no going back now. Evan nodded. There never was. Mark let out a slow breath. They didn't stop us. Sarah glanced back once toward the distant doors. They didn't know how. They continued forward. Behind them, the Galactic Assembly remained in stunned silence, trying to understand what it had just witnessed. The galaxy had just watched humans do something no one else ever dared. They had stood up, and they had walked away. Days passed after the walkout, and the galaxy began to feel the change. At first, no one connected the events. Trade ships still moved. Messages still flowed. The Assembly continued issuing statements about stability and control. On the surface, everything seemed the same. Then the problems began. Along major trade routes once guarded by human patrols, ships started to disappear. Some were delayed. Others sent distress calls that went unanswered. Insurance networks lit up with alerts. Merchants grew nervous. Pirate groups, long kept in check by human fleets, returned to old hunting grounds. They moved carefully at first, testing defenses. When they found none, they struck quickly. Convoys were scattered. Cargo was stolen. Crews were left drifting. Assembly forces responded slowly. Their patrols were stretched thin, focused on core systems. Border routes were no longer a priority. Except one set of routes. Human-controlled space remained calm. Ships traveling through human regions reported smooth passage. Patrols appeared quickly when called. Warnings were issued before danger reached civilians. No assembly flags were present, yet order held. Evan stood on the bridge of a human command vessel, watching live feeds scroll across the main display. His posture was relaxed, but his attention was sharp. Another distress call rerouted, Mark said from a nearby station. Non-human vessel. They're outside our borders but close enough. Evan nodded. Send assistance. Mark hesitated. Assembly didn't request. I know, Evan said calmly. Send it anyway. Sarah looked up from her console. They're refugees, she said. Their route was declared unprotected yesterday. Then they're civilians, Evan replied. That's enough. Human ships moved with quiet speed. They did not broadcast threats. They did not demand payment. They simply arrived, placed themselves between danger and the helpless, and stayed until the threat passed. Word spread fast. Refugee vessels began changing course toward human space. Some sent polite requests. Others came without warning, desperate and damaged. They were not turned away. Lena stood on a docking platform, watching a battered transport settle into place. Its hull was scorched, its engines barely functional. The hatch opened slowly. Families emerged first. Different species. Different shapes. Fear written clearly on their faces. Human medics moved forward without hesitation. You're safe, one of them said, voice steady. Follow us. The refugees did not understand the words at first. But they understood the tone. They followed. Across human space, similar scenes played out. Temporary shelters became permanent zones of safety. Supplies were shared. Repairs were offered without contracts. No one asked for loyalty. No one demanded gratitude. Pirates noticed. They tested human borders once. Only once. A pirate flotilla crossed into a human-protected corridor, confident from recent success elsewhere. Within minutes, human ships appeared. They did not fire first. They broadcast a single message. This route is protected. Turn back. The pirates laughed. Then the human ships maneuvered. Not aggressively. Precisely. They blocked escape paths. Disabled engines with clean, controlled strikes. No explosions. No casualties. The pirate ships were left drifting, unharmed but helpless, to be collected later by neutral authorities. The message spread quickly through criminal networks. Human space was not worth the risk. Fear began to spread, quiet and cold. Not fear of attack. Fear of absence. Assembly members received reports daily. Trade losses. Refugee movements. Increased instability in regions once labeled secure. They noticed the pattern. Where humans acted, order followed. Where humans withdrew, chaos grew. In private chambers, council members argued. They are overstepping, one said. They act without authorization. They are doing our job, another replied. And doing it better. They are gaining influence, a third warned. They already had it, came the quiet response. We just ignored it. Evan received a message request from an assembly liaison. He read it once, then closed it without reply. Sarah noticed. They want talks. Evan nodded. They want control. Mark smiled slightly. Too late. Out in the wider galaxy, people talked. Traders shared stories. Refugees told others where safety could be found. Independent systems began requesting human protection directly, bypassing the assembly entirely. Humanity did not announce a new order. They simply acted. And the galaxy, watching closely now, began to understand the true cost of what had been lost. Fear spread not because humans were dangerous. Fear spread because humans were no longer holding the line for free. And everyone felt it. Inside the Galactic Assembly, the mood had changed. The chamber still looked the same. The lights still glowed. The council seats were still raised above the delegates. But the feeling in the air was different. It was heavier. Uneasy. Council members whispered among themselves. They did not do this often. Private channels opened and closed in quick bursts. Data streams flashed across hidden displays. Reports arrived faster than they could be dismissed. Trade losses increased each cycle. Refugee numbers rose. Border systems sent warnings instead of requests. Pirates moved more freely in regions once considered secure. And through it all, one detail remained constant. Humans were not attacking. They were not sanctioning. They were not making demands. They were simply absent. A council member with a long memory leaned toward another. "They have done nothing," they said quietly. "That is the problem," came the reply. Humans had not challenged the Assembly's authority directly. They had not called for rebellion. They had not declared independence with banners or speeches. They had just stopped participating. Stopped patrolling Assembly routes. Stopped enforcing Assembly laws. Stopped absorbing risks meant to protect others. The galaxy felt the loss immediately. A delegate from a trade world stood and spoke, unable to hide their frustration. "Our convoys are under attack. We followed Assembly policy. Where is the protection we were promised?" The council offered calm words. Reassurances. Plans for future review. The delegate sat back down, unconvinced. Another rose. "Refugees are crossing our borders. They say human space is the only safe route left." Murmurs spread. Human space. Not Assembly space. Human. A council member reviewed a report, their expression tightening. "Pirate activity has dropped to zero in regions controlled by humans." Another replied softly, "And doubled everywhere else." Silence followed. For centuries, the Assembly had believed it was the force holding the galaxy together. It passed laws. It set borders. It issued orders. It believed structure alone created peace. But structure without effort was hollow. Humans had filled the gaps no one wanted to see. They guarded dangerous routes. Responded first to crises. Took on tasks that brought little credit but high risk. They did it quietly. And now they weren't. A senior council member finally said what others were thinking. "We assumed they would endure." Pause. "We assumed wrong." Across the chamber, some delegates began to look afraid, not of humans but of the truth settling in. The Assembly had not been strong. It had been supported. And the support was gone. Another council member leaned forward. "They are still protecting civilians," they said. "Just not under our banner." "That makes it worse," someone replied. "They are proving it was never about authority." The realization spread slowly like cold through metal. Humans did not need permission to act. They never had. They had chosen cooperation. They had chosen restraint. They had chosen to stand in the space between danger and comfort. And when asked to sacrifice silently, they had chosen to leave. For the first time, the Assembly saw itself clearly. Not as a pillar but as a roof, standing only because something beneath it carried the weight. That something had been human effort, human presence, human choice. Now the weight was falling. And there was no one left to catch it. Years passed and the galaxy slowly reshaped itself. The old Assembly still existed, but it no longer stood at the center of everything. Its halls were quieter. Its words carried less weight. Many worlds still attended its meetings, but fewer believed it spoke for them. In its place, something new had grown. It did not begin with a declaration or a vote. It began with requests. Independent systems reached out to human space asking for guidance, not control. Trade groups asked for shared protection, not ownership. Small worlds asked for help building defenses so they would not need to beg again. Humans listened. Evan, older now, sat in a simple meeting chamber aboard a station that did not belong to any one world. The room was plain. No grand symbols. No raised seats. Everyone sat at the same level. Sarah stood near a wide display showing routes, agreements, and shared resources. "They want participation," she said. "Not commands." Mark smiled faintly. "Imagine that." Lena watched the gathered representatives, dozens of species, all different, all nervous in the same way. "They're choosing this," she said quietly. "That matters." It mattered more than anyone expected. The new coalition formed slowly. Each member joined by consent. Each agreement could be left without punishment. Protection was mutual. Decisions were shared. Humans did not lead by force. They led by example. Trade routes stabilized again, this time under shared responsibility. Patrols were mixed. Knowledge was exchanged freely. When conflict arose, it was addressed early before it grew into disaster. Some worlds left and returned later. Others stayed and grew stronger. No one was trapped. The galaxy felt different. Safer not because it was controlled but because it was cared for. Historians would later argue about when the old order truly ended. Some pointed to the collapse of assembly authority. Others to the rise of the new coalition. Most agreed on one moment. The walkout. The day humans stood, spoke calmly and left. That moment was replayed in schools and archives. Not as an act of rebellion but as an act of choice. Evan's words were studied for what they lacked. No anger, no threat, no demand. Just clarity. A young scholar once asked an elder council member why that moment mattered so much. The elder paused before answering. Because it showed us something we feared, they said. That power does not come from holding others in place. It comes from being worth standing beside. Humans were not rulers. They never wanted to be. They were partners. And partners could leave. That was what the galaxy learned too late and never forgot. The most dangerous species was not the one that conquered worlds. It was the one that knew its value. And knew when to walk away.